From all this, we're joined now by Policy Initiative Executive Director Isobel Frye. Isobel, good to have you once again as we look at those numbers yet again as they keep coming out. I think what is clear and what we all agree on is that 0.3% is nothing to celebrate. But is it something worth interrogating? And others have looked at it, and as you're listening there, opposition party would tell you that, well, the reason why that picture still looks so grim and above 40%, it's because of the redress policies that are racially slanted, that are not working, and therefore those numbers are not going to change. But if you speak to SAFTU, for example, they'll tell you, well, the problem is wealth distribution. So we need to distribute the wealth a little bit more, come up with a job creation scheme. And if we are going on the austerity line, it's definitely not going to work. So either way, the other agreement is that there's something that needs to happen in the policy that is currently not happening.
Absolutely. Good evening, Thabo, and thanks so much for the invitation. I think that the optimism is ill-placed, and I think that possibly the optimism is a reaction to a profound realization that we are in a critical situation. We at SPIRE use the broader definition only of unemployment, and that's 42%. The reason for this is that the narrow definition basically excludes people who've given up looking for work. So discouraged work seekers, to our view, they are not employed. So if people are not employed and they are working age, they should be counted as unemployed. So we're looking at just under 12 million adults, and that doesn't include people who are not economically active. The question is what are the drivers and what is to be done? As some of your analysts have said, we need to be looking at the differentiation within the figures of unemployed people. We see that there's a significantly higher unemployment rate for women, 46%, than men, 38%. But one of the last comments that you made, Thabo, was the question of the opposition parties talking about racially skewed employment policies and the impact on that. And to that, we need to go straight back to the statistics because the evidence is clearly there. For Black African people, the unemployment rate is 46%. For whites, it's 9.2%. So I think the problem is actually that the redress policies have not been working. What we would say, however, is that we need to be looking at why there is no demand for labor. We can skill labor as much as we want, but if there is no demand in the economy, then the jobs are not going to be created, and that's the point. They haven't been created. We need to be looking at what are the kinds of policies, micro policies that will stimulate demand. For me, one of the worrying factors about this quarter's unemployment figures is that the sector that lost the greatest number of jobs was manufacturing, and the sector that increased the greatest number of jobs was construction. Now, construction jobs are indecent jobs. They're short jobs. There's no decent work there, whereas manufacturing is the sector that we have put all our eggs in the basket of, saying that we need to grow this, we can create decent jobs, and we can grow our economy. I mean, according to the recent research by Duma Kupule, one of our research associates, if we're looking to grow at the rate that Treasury was thinking of 1.8% of GDP growth this year, which has now been scaled down to just over zero, that would only have produced 640,000 jobs. Now, if you're looking at 12 million jobs, we're clearly not going to create sufficient jobs just by growing the economy. One of the things that we say, based on our research, is that we need to shock stimulate the economy in order to get it to grow. That we need to do by pumping money into the economy in order to get that stimulus, and that would trickle down two ways that we can think of the quickest. The one would be the universal basic income grant over 3 years, and the second, and this is the important aspect that many people fail to grasp, the second has to be an employment guarantee scheme. We have to get people into work. We believe the basic income grant will put money into people's hands, and that will be an immediate stimulus. People can support each other's small and micro businesses. People will have enough money to look for work, to go and find jobs. But the state needs to invest in a massive national employment guarantee scheme, which they underwrite, and that then feeds into ensuring that people are in work, and from there you can upskill once people are in the formal employment situation.
But what is going to keep them from doing that? I mean, one of the paths that we have taken, certainly from Treasury, is to spend less, not to spend money that we actually do not have. And so if you say to them, well, you need to open up your pockets a little bit more and spend on the basic income grant, spend on the job guarantee scheme, they will say, from what money?
It's interesting because a lot of people say that GEAR led to a jobless growth. When we've been looking at the figures, what we can see is that the boom period after GEAR actually produced 1.3 million jobs. And that was as a direct result of government expenditure into the economy. The economy doesn't grow when government doesn't spend. Austerity means that government is cutting. Globally, we can see that those economies that are thriving are the ones in which the state underwrites. Now, we, in the research papers that we released recently, we've identified that there are a number of places in the economy that are sitting on idle bundles of cash. We don't agree with Treasury's view that there isn't enough money. The question is how that money is utilized. But in addition to that, Thabo, and I think this is really something which people need to mull over.
Before we got cut off, you were saying that the question is not whether or not there is money, is that there is money, but it's not being well spent. But if you look at the numbers, 5 out of 9 sectors that saw an increase, one of them is community and social services with about 63,000 or so. And government will tell you that, well, that should indicate that we are doing our bit.
I think that we agree that government is doing programs. What we're arguing is that the size of the problem, Thabo, is a war, really. There's a crisis of unemployment which is on the level of the kinds of destruction that war brings to society. So to be creating a couple of 100,000 jobs here and there, when you're looking at 12 million adults who are long-term employment out of jobs. I mean, one of the things that we have been looking at is the 350 grant, because according to global theory, that would be one conduit by which money is pumped into poor economies. However, we haven't seen the take-up and the returns that we would have expected. And the analysis is that, firstly, 350 rand is too little to enable people both to meet their basic needs and to start jobs. But also, and this is a crucial aspect, we are actually using the policy eligibility as a disincentive, because if you start making money with the 350, you immediately lose the 350. There is no incentive to use that to build and to gain in order to expand. You lose the certainty. So there are a number of policies. It just goes back to answer your question. Government is doing things. The question is, are they doing them in the right order? And secondly, is there recognition of the scale and the magnitude of what we're looking at? I mean, if you look at the fact that the majority of developing countries have an unemployment rate of about 12%, ours is 42%. We cannot compare and borrow piecemeal from little policies. We need to be looking at how we reconfigure, how we get people, firstly, with demand in their pocket, and secondly, into an employment-generating scheme. Yeah. The interesting thing, and again, the tragic thing, Thabo, is that of the 14 million people who applied for the social relief of distress last month, 52% had never been employed before. Others had been employed for 1 to 3 months, 3 to 6 months, but over half of the applicants, working age applicants, had never had a job before. That shows that we are not appreciating the level that we need to go into. Yeah. So yes, we need to be growing those sectors that we're doing, but there needs to be a massive rethink. We cannot afford on the level of state austerity to employ the numbers of people that we need to.
Somebody might say, are we not overemphasizing the responsibility largely on government and leaving the private sector out of this? And the private sector are saying, well, the reason why we have not been able to absorb, one is because of the failure to relax labor market regulations, and two, the failure to improve the quality of education. Those touch points, if we were to do something about them, would they drastically and dramatically change that employment situation?
I think that the private sector is not going to put their hand up and say, let's spend money creating jobs. I think they're going to say, let the state flood in jobs, and we'll come in second behind that. The fact that there have been about 800,000 graduates who've been unemployed and also applying for the social relief of distress grant for at least 3 years suggests that it's not necessarily a skills problem. There is no demand for employment. Now, that comes down to the fact that, for instance, those sectors, historically South Africa's labour market was skewed on the apartheid system, where you had high-skilled jobs for whites and you had lower-skilled jobs for the majority of South Africans. Now, that was in the mining and agriculture. Those have been mechanized, and we haven't replaced those sectors with the kinds of job-hungry sectors. Manufacturing would be great. We need the industrial policy to be setting up productive factories where people can be employed on the job, and that can lead. But we also need to be looking at regional integration. What can we produce in South Africa that can be absorbed by our neighbours? How can we collectively address this fact that people seem to be the last thought? The economy should be constructed around people's needs. Instead, people are being told that they're marginal, that they're surplus to the economy, and we don't have enough money to feed them. Now, we can see time and again that the research shows that there is space where the economy can be restructured if there is political will. The fact that consistently the choices that are made in order to support businesses' ideas around restructuring, privatization of state utilities means that we're not looking forward to an economy which might not be as high-tech, but at least it can absorb the millions of people. We're looking towards an election next year. There is a vast concern amongst people that we engage with that South Africa is a tinderbox, and we don't see the kinds of political signaling from the state that in any way are we looking at policies which will absorb the needs of 12 million people.
The vast concern around that manufacturing number, which you also highlighted, is the question of a stable power supply. And you're saying, let's see what we can produce. And somebody would say, well, South Africa would produce very little if we don't sort out this energy issue.
Absolutely. I mean, I was looking at the stats earlier. 6 million jobs have been lost in the utility sector alone. So those are 6 million jobs that were in terms of manufacturing maintenance, as well as supply of electricity and other utilities. Now, those are direct jobs. The question of the indirect jobs, where small businesses especially have been closed down because they haven't been able to produce. Now, we were surprised that we haven't seen unemployment insurance fund kind of assistance going out. I mean, this was a problem which was generated by the monopoly electricity supply commission. We would have expected that, as there was with COVID, there would have been some response to ensuring that people were able to pay their workers and not close that down. So that is a significant challenge that we are addressing. Our concern is that we shouldn't look at the short-term crises and blame those entirely for what have been long-term historic drivers of unemployment. Globally, unemployment is on the rise. People no longer have the job guarantees that they had. But in other companies and other countries, at least, there is a greater ability for young people to enter into sectors. Here, because of the closed nature of our economy, it's the big companies that have basically the monopoly around the business work, and therefore you have to get into one of the big companies in order to be able to create and sustain a job.
Isobel, appreciate your time. Thanks so much for coming on. Isobel Frye, they are helping us unpack those numbers. She's the Executive Director of the Social Policy Initiative in South Africa.